Congratulations! You made the varsity, the podcast. My name is John Arand, and I am Puck's sports correspondent and the host of this pod. And today, I am genuinely excited to be joined by Ross Dellenger. Ross is a senior college football writer over at Yahoo Sports, and I can't think of anyone who breaks more stories on this beat. We're going to spend a lot of time today talking about the chaos that is the business of college sports. Lane Kiffin, James Franklin, Tony Petitti, Greg Sankey. Ross is going to tell us where they're all headed with the sport. But before we get to Ross Dellenger, today is Sunday, November 30th, and here's what I'm watching. And it's all about a resurgence of the regional sports networks. Seriously, I have spent the past decade documenting all of the problems with regional sports networks, or RSNs as they're called. As rights fees that the RSNs are paying teams continue to rise, the affiliate fees that they get from cable and satellite companies continues to fall. It's an unsustainable business. Now, Fox got out of the business. Sinclair couldn't make it work. Diamond Sports, now known as Main Street Sports, it went into bankruptcy. Warner Brothers Discovery, they got out. YouTube dropped almost all of them. So did Hulu plus Live TV. Comcast sent them to digital tiers. It was really not a very good business, and anyone involved with them was basically responsible for managing their decline. So what's this resurgence? Well, I got my hands on a report from N.I.L that showed a lot of growth in streaming services offered by RSNs. Per the report, RSN signups grew by 63% year over year for the first quarter of 2025. That grew to an 81% year over year growth in the second quarter. Mind you, the direct-to-consumer business is not nearly as profitable as a cable bundle. I love to tell the story of how I used to walk my dog at night in DC, and I'd take note at what people were watching. And at times, it seemed like I was the only guy on the block who was watching the Orioles or the Nationals. All of my neighbors were subsidizing my baseball fandom, and I thank them for that. This tracks with other findings from N.I.L, which found that subscribers are staying with their streaming bundles for the most part. And again, this tracks with the rest of the business. Entertainment programming, it went to streaming long ago. Sports was the last holdout for the cable bundle. Sports and news, live event programming. But now, we're seeing evidence that even sports is starting to make that move. So my questions center around legacy media's role in this transition and whether Congress, or really any federal regulators, will try to show sports as a march off broadcasters, try to slow it down. Okay, now let's get to Ross Dellenger. Ross Dellenger, your beat covering college sports, I can't think of anything more chaotic than what you're covering nowadays. And the thing I love about your reporting and the thing I love about just this whole beat is I have no idea what college athletics is going to look like in 2 years, maybe 3. I don't even know what the time frame is. There's certainly 5 years. So I think I want to give it like an open-ended question to you to start. Like college sports in 3 years, how is it going to look and feel different than the way it looks today?
Oh my goodness.
And I want to remind you, we only have like an hour for this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about 3 years ago. So fall of 2022. And we were a year into NIL. Schools were trying to figure out how to do NIL, what to do. Could they do it? Could they pay players? They've been told for so long by the NCAA not to pay players, that it was illegal to pay players. And then, I think fall of 22 was when you started to see the collectives really ramp up to another level and really spread across the country. So I think about that 3 years ago and where it was, and now to where we are today, right? Where then, having a $5 to $7 million roster was a lot. Now we have $25, $27 million rosters. And I think in 3 years, I have a suspicion that what college athletics is trying to do with athlete compensation, which is prohibit boosters from being involved, despite during the NIL era, them bringing boosters back in, right? Letting them back in. Now they're trying to cut them out with the new enforcement entity, the College Sports Commission, and the clearinghouse, NIL Go clearinghouse. That's basically, without getting too detailed in it, just supposed to prohibit booster money. Thinking about that and the first 4 or 5 months of that, I just don't see how this is going to work long term. I know how they want it to work and how their intention is for it to work. I think legally it's going to be hard to work. And so in 3 years, by that time, you're probably going to have football rosters of at least 30, 35, maybe upwards of $40 million. And you're probably going to have frustration among administrators and officials at the top level of college athletics in the fact that the clearinghouse really, it maybe isn't doing what they intended it to do. And you're going to have ideas that we've seen circulated now, collective bargaining, right, sort of ideas, I think start to come to fruition. And you're probably going to have football specifically, maybe men's basketball and other really high revenue sports, which really be honest, those are the only two, going to be treated separately. And whether it's collective bargaining or some kind of other compensation system with some kind of other rules around it, I think they're going to see.
What I find to be unique about your space right now, the space that you cover, is that there are so many power brokers in that space that are begging Congress to get involved and to provide a solution. And having covered sort of business, I live in DC, so I'm adjacent to regulators. There's no other business that is begging Congress to get in and try to save the business from themselves. Yeah. When you talk about the next 3 years or the next 5 years, where are these changes going to be pushed from? Is it going to come from DC? Is it going to come from the SEC Big Ten, or is it going to come from some other area that I'm not quite up on right now?
Well, Congress is, as you mentioned, right? No other entity really wants Congress involved in their affairs. And 5 years ago, or 6 years ago now, I guess.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And I guess it was 6 years ago now that was the first sort of lobbying effort that Mark Emmert, the then NCAA president, came up here to DC and lobbied. So 6 years. It's taken 6 years for a bill to finally pass one of the chambers, and it should next week. The SCORE Act, this college sports legislation that is jam-packed with everything the NCAA wants, right? Antitrust exemption, state law preemption, anti-employment provision. It's probably going to pass the House. It's going to get to the Senate. And as often is the case with House bills that get to the Senate, they open the door and they just throw it right out. I would expect that something similar to happen. But it's taken 6 years to get to this point, which tells you how slow Congress moves and how sensitive of an issue that this is. So I think you will continue to have Congress, especially leading Republicans, be at the center, like a Ted Cruz, of trying to get something done in the Senate once they get the SCORE Act from the House. So it could come from Congress. I think Congress will be involved in that. You mentioned the SEC and Big Ten. Let's be honest, they sort of make all the big decisions right now in college athletics. If they're not both on board with a decision, usually the decision does not happen. So, in about a year ago, the two leagues had a really good relationship. They were meeting often. That's changed. I don't know that they're in the same position that they were a year ago. I don't think they see things in the way together like they did this time last November. So I think that hurts any kind of decision among the two to do something different with college athletics. So it feels like we're going to be sort of continuing down this road in trying to continue Congress to act until finally, as I mentioned in my prediction of 3 years from now, a group gets together and says we have to have better rules and regulation. So we have to create some kind of collective bargaining with the athletes. And I think that unless we get some kind of miracle bill, right, that feels like what's going to have to happen.
In your mind, who is in that group? Is it just those top two conferences, or does it expand beyond that?
Um, I think that everybody wants to be in the group, right? And we all know that is not going to happen. Like everybody's not going to get in the group. All of Division One's not going to get in the group. All of the 130 FBS programs aren't going to get in the group. So is it the 70? Is it the four of them who can really afford it? The Big 10, Big 12, ACC, and SEC. Those are the ones that make enough money on football, men's basketball, that stuff, where they can maybe afford to, I don't want to, breakaway is sort of the wrong word, but they can pay athletes in the way that others can't? Or is it the top 30, or 40, the Big 10 and SEC together and some mixture? I have a hard time believing that, in 3 years or maybe even in 5 years, that you're going to have a college sports super league division just with 30 or 40. I have a hard time believing that politically. That's going to be really, really difficult to
And why is that? Is that
convince.
like all the Cody Campbell stuff? Like
Well,
you
think
don't want
about,
to
yeah.
disenfranchise?
Sure, right. You're disenfranchising everybody else. If all the big brands got together and did a 20 or 30 team sort of super league and created their own rules and did more professional collective bargaining, you're cutting out everybody else. And there are state senators, huge political and boosters and donors and school donors in Congress, other House members that are from all these states and are affiliated with these schools who have been cut out of this. And so, at the very least, you'll have a ton of lawsuits that probably you'll lose. And just politically, and getting anything from Congress is going to be an issue, right? After you do something like that. So if you need protection to do this super league or whatever you're going to plan on doing, think about it. Like if you're disenfranchising the senators and congressmen, their state schools, they're not gonna support anything that helps you. So it's hard politically to see that happen, and that's why I say it feels to me that it will be the four leagues, and the 70 of them, at least the first step, right? I feel like college athletic, I often say, right, college athletics is like Congress, right? It doesn't run or walk; it crawls in making decisions. It's very slow, and so I think one of the steps in this is what we've seen. Right, we've seen different steps toward this path over the last few years. We've seen the power conferences get their what they call the autonomous powers, where they can control legislation. That was sort of a step. We see the NIL era as sort of a step that's grown the gaps between some of the haves and have-nots. We saw a new step recently with the Big Ten and SEC getting more control over decisions, especially with the college football playoff and all that stuff. So we're on like this step by step of where the last step is maybe some kind of super league or 30 or 40 team division of the biggest brands. But I feel like we're a ways away from that. And I think a lot of people in college athletics are trying to avoid that step by getting Congress involved, right? They're running to Congress to, if you don't get involved and protect us and protect these compensation rates and the rules and the transfer policy, there's going to be a quicker move to some kind of super league or super division. So they want Congress to help to sort of prevent this move. And I think in that regard, they're kind of right. Like, I think there's enough frustration with the current environment that if Congress doesn't do something to sort of protect things, Or if they don't all collectively bargain, right? Because it's one or the other, John, right? It's you either collectively bargain. If you want rules and regulations and all that, you want caps, you either collectively bargain or you get Congress involved. And if neither of those things happen, you're going to have this unregulated system and frustrated, angry administrators where they are going to separate and they're going to say, we're going to go over here and do our own thing.
You know what story I love pursuing, not just in college, but really everywhere, is like I try to identify who the power brokers are. And in college, I've always said, okay, yeah, it's Tony Petitti and it's Greg Sankey, right? Now, the commissioner of the Big Ten and commissioner of the SEC. Over the past couple of months, like, and I'm not sure why. I think it might be because the SEC kind of it moves forward with one voice, and Greg Sankey seems to be running it, really well. The As you've reported, like especially with the private equity in the Big Ten, the Michigan is upset and USC is upset now. Half the Big Ten seems to be in revolt. Am I right in thinking that if I'm trying to pick a power broker in college, it certainly would be Greg Sankey and not Petitti? Or does Petitti still have as much power because he does run one of the two biggest conferences?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Greg has been in college athletics so long, right? He's a lifelong college athletics administrator, 40 years, and so he has that institutional knowledge. He's a little more, or maybe a lot more diplomatic than how they've been in the Big Ten. He seems to work more, in a way, more for uh, keeping everything sorted together in more of the status quo. Um, in Tony Petitti in the Big Ten seemed to be more um, progressive in a way, or aggressive, you might say, in the shift to full to the next evolution of college athletics. So I think, plain and simple, Greg Sankey has more friends in college athletics, right? He has more friends in the industry, and I think that Tony has come in with some of his ideas, and I think he's probably angered and frustrated a lot of people. And
Mhm.
so I don't see the college athletics sort of power brokers getting behind him as much as I would see them getting behind Greg. I think that's probably fair. And honestly, Tony Petitti probably feels the same, right? He probably agrees that he knows how he's approached certain things, and it's been received differently than how Greg goes about his business.
Well, the Big 12 is certainly not one of the top two. But Brett Yormark came in much like Tony Petitti. He has a business
Mhm.
background and he broke a lot of eggs. But he does. You don't see the Big 12 schools stepping out of line nearly as much. It seems it's. I'm not sure if that equates to what you said of having friends. But
Yeah,
it's just something that I've noticed.
yeah. It is these conferences in the dynamic with these conferences, from presidents to their athletic directors to then the commissioner, and then we forget sometimes. I know you don't, but the TV partner, right, is so important and so big, and it's so interesting. Each league um, just has a different set of values and interests and the way they approach things. In Greg, um, I think when you look at his history in the SEC and his relationships in that league, I just think he's sort of got a better grasp, not just in his league, but in some others as well, how he handles himself, how diplomatic he sort of is. But you mentioned Brett. Um, Brett came in a lot like Petitti, right, from outside of college athletics, and he's aggressive with a lot of stuff, especially revenue generation. And not everything is sort of worked, right, that he's suggested. Same thing with Tony. But they keep on going and trying at it, and I think that's important. But I do think, as much as the lack of friends maybe that Tony doesn't have throughout college athletics, it seems like those in the league, um, especially his athletic director room, really appreciate what he's done, the aggressive nature of what he's done with some of these things. I think that they appreciate him, and to him and probably to a lot of commissioners, that's the most important thing.
Ross, let me take a quick break, and I want to come back. And you've been all over this Big Ten private equity snafu that's been going on, and I'm dying to know just what exactly it means. But we'll be right back. I love this story. The Big Ten trying to get a private equity deal that was off again, on again, now off again. Irritated two of the marquee teams in the conference. My first question to you, that was Michigan and USC. My question to you is, what exactly? Look, I'm a Maryland guy, and how would that private equity affect the University of Maryland, one of the Big Ten teams?
Yeah, well, they would get an immediate infusion of $110 million is the kind of infusion. 110 for the bottom 13 schools, 100 and around 45, I think, million for the USC and Oregon. They're in the second tier, and then the top tier is Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. They would get 190 million. That was the proposal, right, of the upfront infusion. So that's what a school like Maryland and those in the 13 would see. That's the benefit they would see immediately. Then there's the creation of this Big Ten
let me just interrupt
Enterprises.
you for a quick
Yeah.
second. With that money, that goes to what? Paying the players. It goes to the facility. It goes to pretty much everything.
Whatever they'd want to do with it. I think right now in the Big Ten there is a everybody's under financial stress, right, in college athletics, because it's $20+ million hole for the players and all that. But I think specifically in the Big Ten, they have built some facilities or are building some facilities that cost a lot of money. And so I think a lot of the capital infusion would have been used to offset a lot of that. But at places where it wasn't, you certainly could put it somewhere and let it grow, and it would be, help you as part of your revenue share with the players. Or it could pay, I don't know, a coach that you fired and owed, 30, 40,
A lot of
$50
them
million.
out there right now.
So, yes. Yeah. So, part of me doesn't think it's super coincidental that you had Wisconsin and you had Maryland announce that their coaches would be returning after it seemed that the Big Ten deal was dead or dying. Not to say it had that much of a role, but you could see that there were a lot of people in the Big Ten, I think, counting on this to go through and happen. I think they were really close. There were just a few board members at Michigan away, basically, from this thing happening. There was a lot of people counting on that money.
Is it? You said it's dead or it's dying. Which one is it?
I think to a degree they're keeping it alive. It would be hard for me. It's hard to say that it's never going to happen. Right, in 5 years it might happen or something. But it's hard for me to see in the next year it happening. I don't think that Michigan's board is really moving on it. This needs the vote of all the presidents. It needs the unanimity to extend the grant of rights with everybody, all 18. And all the presidents, from what I understood, were pretty much on board. And all the athletic directors, except one, were pretty much on board. But the Michigan Board of Regents and some other boards around the country, when they started to find out more and more about the deal, they were told that they didn't have authority to vote on the deal. That this was a presidential decision, and that was that, and that certainly um, just frankly pissed them all off, right? I mean, there were a lot of them very angry that they didn't have any voice in an extension of the grant of rights with a conference for a $2.4 billion deal. As if several of them has said publicly now, we approve things that are much less. Like, why are we not approving this? So Michigan's Board of Regents, and they have an interim president, and so is USC. The two schools that were against this publicly both have interim presidents. I think that's important to note. So Michigan's board, obviously, they basically told their president, you are not to vote on this. And I think USC's athletic director was the one athletic director in the room against it. And she was aligned with her board in voting against this, telling the president to vote against this. There was a thought the Big Ten would go forward with just 16, and they issued to Michigan and USC sort of a document, an email of like, here's what would happen if you don't vote for it. Here's our tentative date of voting for it. Sort of some would take it as threats. They did. They took it sort of as a threatening. And that really ended the deal, right? Because that got out publicly.
How could you not know that it's going to end the deal? Because those are two of the premier schools. I mean, you're going to threaten to kick them out of the conference? Like all of a sudden, that Fox deal is going to drop by that much more money. It seems.
And John, I'm not convinced that Ohio State was going to go through with the deal if it was just 16. I'm still not convinced that ever really would have happened.
The Big 12 has also in the past, Brett Yormark's talked about looking into private equity. I haven't really heard it with the SEC or ACC, but if two of them are talking, you would expect others are too. Yeah. Where does this stand in terms of college sports? Are the conferences kind of united now, saying like, boy, that looks like something that's not going to be able to get rammed through, or is this something that's still out there for other conferences?
No, I think it's still out there. The Big 12 is down the road sort of for a third time trying to get something done. It's nothing like the Big Ten deal, right? I don't know that we'll see anything like the Big Ten deal again or anytime soon. The amount of money and how the whole construction and framework of it. So the Big 12 deal is going to look a lot different, right? The money's not going to be the same. It's probably got an opt-in, opt-out for schools where you're not required to be a part of it or whatever. The American Conference is down the road on something similar. Tim Pernetti, he's been pretty aggressive. I think, John, there's a half a dozen to a dozen schools.
Tim Pernetti, another guy who comes from the business side of things, coming in and taking a look at it. Yeah, I mean, there's a common denominator there, right?
Right, absolutely. I think the SEC and most of the SEC schools are, this is a non-starter. Like, they don't want anywhere near this. They don't want to do PEC. They don't want to do PE. Their presidents have been very clear with Greg Sankey about that. They hired Goldman Sachs, I don't know, maybe a year ago or so, to start studying and exploring possibility of these deals. When they found out sort of the Big Ten was doing it, right? You want to see what's out there. And let's just be honest, the Big Ten can get $2.4 billion. The SEC can probably get $3.4 billion, based on viewership. If that's the value, it's based on viewership. That's probably it. So, but they're not interested in it at all. And I don't get the sense the ACC is real interested either. But there are individual schools. I think there's a dozen or so individual schools that are down the road on a private sort of capital, private equity sort of deal for them individually.
Ross, as you reported this Big Ten private equity like months long, were you like, as you were reporting, were you surprised? Were you gobsmacked by what was happening, or did you foresee the problems that were like, how foreseeable were the problems that TD ran into on this?
Yeah, it's been a long process. I think it was back in one of your sports business buddies, I think, wrote the original story back in January, Daniel Libet of Sportico, about the banker Evercore being hired by the Big Ten to sort of start the process. When really it had started really last summer, I think is basically when it started. And I had heard a little bit about it, but then that story came out, and then I heard more about it in May when I think they did a presentation at Big Ten spring meetings for the ADs and presidents, and I heard feedback from that meeting over this past summer, that was all pretty positive, and it seemed like this thing was sort of, maybe going to happen, right? And I think as time went on, it got more and more people on the bandwagon. More and more people got on, and the last one it seemed on maybe in August or September was Michigan's administration. Michigan's athletic director and president, they sort of were the last ones to sort of get on. Of course, little did they know a month later, their board would cause that to all sort of crumble. But it did feel like for several months through the summer, in the early fall, that while they got all these schools on aboard, they were getting these schools aboard because they were changing the deal for them, right? They were tweaking this and adjusting that. So every time I would hear something, things would be different, right? The deal would be different or look different. Numbers would be different. And I'll be honest, like, it's been one of the most frustrating things in the world, what's happened with this reporting of this, because I was ready to report about it in July. And I had a lot of the numbers in July. I had the $2 billion number. I had the 10-year grant of rights extension. I had the $150 million upfront cash for each school. Like, I had a lot of information, but every time I'd go to somebody, it would sort of change, and there would be a belief that it might not happen. And so they pushed me off until, of course, as you know, John, I got beat on the original story, of course. And that's what happens, right? But part of the reason I never wrote the original story is, guess what? What happened in the end? It's exactly why I didn't write the original story, is because it crumbled in the end, and because the numbers changed in the end. So it's been fascinating to sort of follow. I've learned a lot because I didn't know about a lot of this stuff, right? And it's been really fascinating to me, and I feel like I'm a little more knowledgeable about the subject now. And so in other leagues and other schools, because I think that's what will happen first, John, is an individual school will do a PE or PC deal. I can understand a little more now. Mm-hmm.
Ross, when did you start at Yahoo? It was 3 years ago?
July 2023, 2.5 years ago. Yeah.
I mean, I bet you thought you were going to be writing about Indiana and Ohio State and, stuff like you're covering hardcore sports business stuff. Does it surprise you?
Yeah. Yeah. I tell people all the time, they ask me about like how I got into doing a lot of the sports business stuff and do I like it? I get that a lot. Do you really like this stuff? It's like, yes, I do. I do like this stuff. I've done 15 years or 18 years or so of writing about the starting left guard and the quarterback and the cornerback and some big game. And, that's all boring. I've done it for 15, 20 years and watched football all my life for 40 years. So this is new. And it's evolving and changing. And to me, that's fun, right? And there's a lot of news value in it because it's all new. And to me, that's really fun. And so it started during COVID. I don't think a lot of my colleagues really wanted to cover in-depthly, and I don't blame them, in-depthly, like how COVID impacted college sports. And obviously that transcended the field, right? So that was a lot of off-the-field stuff. And I just dove right in. And each year, John, it's been something different, right? COVID, N.I.L, conference realignment, college football playoff stuff, now house case, revenue share stuff, eligibility stuff. It's just been something new, Congress and all that. So it's been something new. And here in DC, and with a political reporter as a wife, it's helped me sort of tremendously kind of more easily step into that sort of role.
Ross, let me take one more quick break. When we come back, just a couple other fascinating stories on your beat that I just want to pick your brain on. Ross, you said earlier about how there are so many programs that are in financial harm right now, and as a result, like I thought more schools would have the take that Maryland had and Wisconsin had, where they retain their coaches, but the amount of coaches that have been fired in season and the amount of money that's been paid out to them. I mean, just looking, I had to write down some of these names, like Brian Kelly, James Franklin, and the Hugh Freeze. What's going on here? This is something that's really kind of caught me a little bit off guard.
Um, I'll quote an athletic director at the power conference level who told me one time, Ross, you can always find the money. And I think we're seeing schools find the money, even though they cry that they are financially stressed. They find the money, and one of the reasons why they do these things and why they think it's worth it paying 20, 30, 40 million dollars for a coach not to coach is it costs more to keep the coach than it costs to fire him. And what I mean by that is a drop in donations, a drop in attendance, all that stuff, right? All the stuff that we've seen actually at Florida State a little bit. And so they're one of the ones that kept him. And the price of firing him was around $58 million. But they're about to see the price of keeping him, especially if it's a bad season next year. And everybody's so focused on the money right now because of the financial situation all the schools are in that that's what they'll tell you. That's what administrators would tell you is this will cost us more if we don't fire the coach. And but you've seen more keep their coaches than actually I expected this year, right? That Maryland and Wisconsin and Baylor, you've seen them all, Florida State, you've seen them all keep their coaches. I think all those jobs before the season, if people were predicting if they had, a losing season, that they would fire their coach. And I think, just financially with paying the players, I think there's been a shift to let's invest more in the roster. Let's keep the coach and invest more in the roster. And we've seen that at certain places. Sometimes it's paid off. Sometimes it's not. I don't know that there's some magic sort of decision there. We just see it sort of all over the map. Sometimes it just depends on the booster or boosters involved. Will they pony up the money to not just pay the players now, but also pay the coach to get fired? I think we saw at Florida State that, that wasn't the case. They've spent a lot of money already and they didn't want to spend any more.
Yeah, I felt that at Penn State when they fired James Franklin. The game before they fired him, the entire stadium, it seemed, was chanting to fire him. And when you lose a fan base, like at some point, yeah, the cost does come up in terms of how much it would cost to keep him. So I guess like my getaway question on this topic is, it doesn't sound like there's a trend of like keeping or firing coaches. It depends on the university and the coach.
It does. I think the trends you'll see is, and we've seen it the last couple of years, is more of what I said, like we're going to invest in the roster more, keep the coach and invest in the roster. But we've seen that as a little more of a trend than we have maybe in years past. One of the trends I think in coaching too, you'll see is the new coaches hired will have shorter contracts. I don't expect a whole lot of guaranteed 10-year deals anymore. I think you'll see more 6-year, 7-year, like Mike Elko's deal. He re-opted 6 years. The deal that LSU is offering Lane Kiffin is 7 years. So you'll see shorter deals that maybe the buyout either is not fully guaranteed, maybe it's mitigated or offset with new compensation, or there's some other terms, or the buyout can be reduced. So I think you'll see more of that. And that's a lesson learned about, these huge buyouts that we've seen from Jimbo Fisher to James Franklin, although Penn State got off pretty light on that one. Hugh Freeze and $15 million, Billy Napier, 21 million. So I think everybody sort of learned their lesson there.
got to get into the CFP expansion. When's it going to expand? How much is it going to expand? I'm asking for you to predict here. What are we going to see over the next? I guess we're going to see something next year. It looks like, right?
I would be surprised. I think that next year's playoff will probably stay at 12, unless they can somehow come to an agreement in the next 2 months. They got the deadline for from ESPN, which was December 1. They got it extended through January to the championship game to make a decision for next year's format. So right now, you have the 12 teams, 5 AQs, 7 at large. The SEC and Big Ten control this decision, basically. They have to involve everybody else, but they have to both agree for a new format to be adopted. And the SEC wants a 16-team format with 5 AQs and 11 at large. So they just want to add 4 at large to the field. And the Big Ten wants to do something a little more aggressive, right? They want to go 24 teams or 28 teams. They want to have a bunch of automatic qualifiers for conferences, kind of like a more of an NFL model. And it would probably blow up championship games, right? You would not have conference championship games anymore, which they've been devalued in a way, we've seen anyway. I just don't see the two groups coming together anytime soon, but you never know. I think we have to take a step to 16 before we get to 24, right? Going from 12 to 24 is a lot, and I don't think SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey or the presidents are going to do that. So I would anticipate in 27 or 28 that it may be 16, and then maybe you look at stair-stepping and going up again at some point.
Once again, you mentioned this earlier, the SEC and the Big Ten unable to sort of move forward with a singular vision. It's a part. This is probably the most stark example where you can see that.
Yep, absolutely. And they were sort of on the same page. ADs were having these joint meetings together, and it seemed like they were sort of making decisions simultaneously, and they were working toward a 16-team playoff with 4 automatic qualifiers for the SEC and Big Ten and 2 for the Big 12 and the ACC. And that really got a lot of political pushback and backlash. And it didn't matter to the Big Ten. They were keep on going, and the SEC sort of slowed all that down. And that happened in May. And that really was the beginning of sort of this crumbling of the two leagues' relationships.
Yeah. Ross, speaking to me from DC, we got to make DC. It's like the capital of sports business now with you and me in the city.
I know. Yeah.
Can't thank you enough for joining the pod. I've been wanting to have you on for a while because you've been killing it. You've been breaking more stories than anybody on the beat. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's great to be on, John.
That was great. I really want to thank Ross Dellenger for taking the time to join today's pod. You really should seek out his stories if you don't already. He's usually first, and he's always thorough. More importantly, though, I want to thank you for listening to The Varsity, an Odyssey podcast in partnership with Puck. I also want to thank Puck's executive editors, it's Gabi Grossman, Ben Landy, John Kelly, and the great team from Odyssey, Bob Tabador and Patrick Antonetti. If you like this podcast, make sure to sign up for my newsletter, also called The Varsity. Head over to puck.news and use the code word TheVarsity, all one word, for a 20% discount. And I will see you on Wednesday.